The courtroom was unusually still as Marcus Hayes stepped inside. Shoes clicked against the wooden floor, a sharp sound in the quiet room. Today wasn't just another case, it was a moment that could define his career. Marcus adjusted his tie, took a deep breath, and tried to steady the flutter in his chest. Judge Carlton Whitmore sat high behind the bench, his gaze cold and calculating. Marcus had heard about the judge's habit of belittling anyone he deemed unworthy. Now, facing him directly, Marcus felt the weight of expectation and subtle prejudice pressing down. Every whisper in the room seemed louder, every glance sharper. "Mr. Hayes," Judge Whitmore said slowly, with deliberate condescension, "I trust you are. Ready to handle this?" The emphasis on handle was pointed, meant to remind Marcus of how little respect the judge held. A few eyes in the courtroom shifted, curious to see the lawyer's reaction. Marcus gripped his briefcase tighter. He met the judge's gaze steadily. "Yes, Your Honor." "I am prepared," he said, his voice calm but firm. Inside, his heart raced, but years of preparation and determination kept him grounded. The judge smirked, tapping his gavel lightly, a subtle warning that he intended to make this difficult. Marcus blocked out the whispers and skeptical looks, focusing only on the case ahead. This was more than a legal challenge. It was a test of dignity, courage, and self-respect. Marcus felt a quiet determination rising within him. Today, every word, every step, and every glance mattered. He was ready to show the courtroom who he truly was. As Marcus began presenting his case, Judge Whitmore's smirk only deepened. Every point Marcus made was met with subtle interruptions and cutting remarks. "Are you sure that's correct, Mr. Hayes?" the judge asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Decide." The courtroom fell silent, the tension thick as the audience sensed the judge's intent to embarrass. Marcus kept his composure, carefully explaining the facts and legal precedents. But Judge Whitmore wasn't done. "I've seen many lawyers," he continued, "and I must say, you have a unique style, very ambitious, but perhaps a bit naive." Laughter, quiet but unmistakable, rippled through a few spectators. Marcus felt his cheeks heat, but he refused to falter. The judge then turned to his clerks and whispered something, loud enough for Marcus to catch a portion. It felt like a personal jab, a calculated attempt to undermine him in front of the entire courtroom. Each word from Whitmore was a reminder of the obstacles Marcus had faced as a black lawyer in a system dominated by prejudice. Despite the humiliation, Marcus pressed on. He presented evidence, cited precedents, and carefully dismantled the opposing argument. Yet every small victory was met with the judge's thinly veiled mockery. "Interesting point," Whitmore said with a sarcastic tilt of his head, "but I wonder if you fully grasped the implications." Marcus's heart pounded, but he held steady. He could feel the eyes of the courtroom on him, some doubtful, some supportive. This rising humiliation was more than a test of skill, it was a test of resolve. Marcus knew that remaining calm, patient, and dignified was the only way to survive the judge's relentless attempts to belittle him. By the end of the segment, Marcus had made small progress, but the courtroom still felt hostile. Judge Whitmore's mocking presence loomed over him, a shadow Marcus would need to confront head-on in the moments to come. The tension in the courtroom grew with every passing minute. Judge Whitmore's interruptions became sharper, his tone more cutting. "Mr. Hayes, are you implying that my interpretation is flawed?" he sneered, his eyes narrowing. The question wasn't just about lit, it was a challenge, a veiled threat to Marcus's credibility. Marcus stayed calm, though his mind raced. He knew the judge was testing him, looking for any sign of weakness. "Your Honor, I am simply presenting the facts and legal precedents as they stand," Marcus replied evenly. Every word had to be precise. Any slip could be twisted into fodder for ridicule. Whitmore leaned forward, his fingers drumming on the bench. "I suggest you be careful, Mr. Hayes. The courtroom is no place for mistakes," he said, his words laced with menace. The implied threat wasn't lost on Marcus. The judge had power, and he was willing to wield it. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. Marcus could feel the subtle judgment in the air, the anticipation of seeing him falter. He tightened his grip on his briefcase, refusing to let the rising tension break his composure. Then, unexpectedly, the opposing counsel tried to bait Marcus. "Are you sure you're qualified to handle this, Mr. Hayes?" they asked. A smirk, barely concealed. The courtroom held its collective breath. Marcus's answer had to strike the balance between confidence and professionalism. He took a deep breath and met their gaze steadily. "Yes, I am fully prepared, and I trust the court will recognize the merit of my arguments," he said. The words were calm, but his heart thumped like a drum. Every second felt like a battle, every glance a test. By now it was clear. Judge Whitmore was escalating the humiliation into a subtle form of intimidation. Marcus realized that winning this case wouldn't just require knowledge, it would demand courage, resilience, and the ability to withstand relentless pressure. Just as the tension reached its peak, Marcus's phone vibrated silently in his briefcase. He had kept it on silent, but the subtle buzz caught his attention. Reaching discreetly, he glanced at the screen and froze. The caller ID showed an unknown number 1 that immediately made him uneasy. He excused himself quietly and stepped outside the courtroom, feeling the eyes of the audience linger on him as he moved. The hallway was nearly empty, the echoes of the gavel and murmurs fading behind him. Marcus answered cautiously. "Hello?" A deep, calm voice responded. "Mr. Hayes, this is urgent. Listen carefully." Marcus's heart skipped. The voice was unfamiliar, but carried a weight that demanded immediate attention. "Who is this?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "No time for introductions," the voice said. "You're about to face a situation in that courtroom that could escalate beyond a legal battle. But you have the power to change it. Don't hesitate." The line went silent for a moment before the caller added, "Remember, not everything is as it seems. Stay prepared." Marcus's mind raced. Who could this be? A friend? A mentor? Someone with inside knowledge? The warning left him both anxious and strangely reassured. There was a plan, a hidden layer to this day he hadn't considered. Returning to the courtroom, Marcus felt a renewed focus. The judge's smirk still lingered, and the opposing counsel's whispered remarks continued, but the mysterious call had shifted something inside him. It was as if an invisible shield had been placed around his resolve. He carried himself with renewed confidence, ready to face whatever manipulation or intimidation the judge attempted next. There was more at stake than just a case. Marcus now sensed a hidden current in the room, something that could turn the tide if he played his cards carefully. The courtroom had become a chessboard, and Marcus was determined not to be outmaneuvered. Marcus returned to the courtroom with a quiet determination that didn't go unnoticed. The judge's smirk faltered slightly, as if sensing a change in the lawyer's demeanor. Marcus's steps were steady, his posture firm, projecting confidence that drew the attention of everyone present. As he approached the bench, Marcus calmly addressed Judge Whitmore. "Your Honor, before we proceed, I'd like to provide some context regarding my role and authority in this matter." The courtroom shifted, curious and slightly uneasy. Marcus's voice carried a weight he had not revealed before. Whitmore raised an eyebrow, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. Marcus continued, "I am not only representing my client in this case, but I also serve as the Attorney General of this state. I bring the responsibility of the office with me, and the law must be applied fairly and without prejudice." A stunned silence filled the room. The whispered conversation stopped abruptly. Judge Whitmore's smirk wavered, his arrogance confronted by the undeniable authority Marcus had revealed. The audience's skepticism began to turn into awe, and even opposing counsel looked momentarily taken aback. Marcus's presence shifted the dynamics completely. He spoke with measured authority, demonstrating not just legal expertise, but the power vested in his position. Every point he made now carried an added weight, amplified by his office and the respect it commanded. Whitmore's attempts to intimidate Marcus began to falter. The judge leaned back slightly, uncertain for the first time, as Marcus confidently outlined the facts, laws, and precedents that supported his case. There was no room for mockery anymore. The courtroom now watched as the balance of power clearly shifted. Marcus had arrived not just as a lawyer, but as a force that demanded respect. The subtle confidence, the authority of his position, and the undeniable truth he presented made it clear. The dynamics of the courtroom had changed, and Marcus was no longer just defending a case, he was commanding it. Judge Whitmore finally leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Marcus with a mix of disbelief and irritation. "So, you expect me to take your arguments seriously just because of a title?" he said, voice sharp, attempting to regain control. The courtroom felt electric, every ear straining to hear the exchange. Marcus met the judge's gaze steadily, his calm demeanor unwavering. "Your Honor," he replied, "titles alone do not demand respect. Actions, integrity, and adherence to the law do. And that is what I am here to present today." His voice, measured and firm, carried through the room with a clarity that silenced the murmurs. Whitmore's usual smirk flickered, replaced by a shadow of frustration. Every jab he tried, every sarcastic remark was met with Marcus's composed rebuttal. The lawyer cited case after case, evidence after evidence, each point systematically dismantling the judge's attempts at condescension. For a brief moment, the courtroom seemed suspended in time. Even the clerks, the spectators, and opposing counsel watched as Marcus's authority and poise turned the confrontation into a lesson in professionalism and courage. Whitmore's body language betrayed the shift, his leaning forward. Tapping fingers and subtle gestures now suggested uncertainty rather than command. Marcus pressed forward carefully, ensuring that every word was precise, every fact undeniable. "The law is impartial, Your Honor," he said. "It applies equally to all, without prejudice. And today it will speak clearly." By the end of the exchange, Whitmore's face revealed a rare vulnerability. The courtroom, once filled with tension and expectation, now held a sense of anticipation, knowing the balance had shifted. Marcus had not only faced the judge head-on, but had established a presence that could not be ignored. This showdown wasn't just about the case. It was about standing tall against prejudice, arrogance, and intimidation. Marcus had done so with unwavering dignity, and the courtroom would remember it. The courtroom was buzzing with hushed conversations. Marcus's revelation as Attorney General had completely shifted the atmosphere, and now the focus was on Judge Whitmore. His usual confident composure had cracked, and the once smug expression had been replaced by a tense, almost defensive posture. Marcus, fully aware of the attention he commanded, proceeded carefully. "Your Honor," he said, voice steady, "it's crucial that the court understands the full implications of this case, and that justice is served impartially. Any attempt to belittle or intimidate will not go unnoticed." His words, firm but measured, left no room for further mockery. A ripple of murmurs went through the audience as Marcus's calm authority continued to expose the judge's earlier behavior. The whispers of disapproval grew, and spectators began recognizing the judge's condescension and the subtle bias he had tried to hide. Whitmore's colleagues exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that the mockery had backfired spectacularly. Even the opposing counsel, who had initially joined in subtle attempts to undermine Marcus, now watched in stunned silence. The courtroom's energy had shifted entirely. Marcus was on to just defending a case. He was holding the judge accountable in a way that the law and dignity demanded. Whitmore tried to recover, adjusting his robes and clearing his throat, but the damage was done. Every sarcastic comment, every dismissive glance he had thrown Marcus's way, was now visible to all. The courtroom, once tense with intimidation, now resonated with respect for Marcus and a recognition of the judge's failed attempts to dominate. By the time the session adjourned for a short recess, it was clear who had the upper hand. Marcus had turned humiliation into leverage, showing that integrity, preparation, and authority could overcome arrogance. The lesson was unmistakable. Respect is earned, and attempts to belittle others can easily become a public exposure of one's own flaws. When the courtroom emptied, Marcus remained calm, gathering his notes while absorbing the weight of the day. The tension that had once gripped him was replaced by quiet satisfaction. He had faced ridicule, intimidation, and by a sand had emerged with dignity and tact. Word of the confrontation spread quickly. Colleagues and peers praised Marcus for his composure and professionalism. The judge's attempts at mockery had only highlighted Marcus's expertise and authority, making him a symbol of resilience in the legal community. People began to see that courage wasn't loud or brash, it was steady, thoughtful, and unwavering, even under immense pressure. Marcus reflected on the lessons he had learned through this ordeal. He understood that prejudice could appear in subtle, almost invisible ways, but it could always be countered with preparation, calmness, and confidence. The courtroom had been a test, not just of legal skill, but of character and moral strength. Judge Whitmore, now aware of the public scrutiny and the shift in perception, faced the consequences of his arrogance. The day had transformed him from a figure of authority into a cautionary example, showing that respect is earned, not demanded. Marcus's victory wasn't just about the case itself. It was a reminder to everyone present and to those who would hear of it later that integrity and knowledge carry a weight far greater than titles or positions when used wisely. The courtroom had witnessed more than law in action. It witnessed the triumph of perseverance, dignity, and ethical strength. As Marcus left the building, he held his head high, aware that this experience would guide him in countless future challenges. The lesson was clear. No obstacle, no prejudice, and no intimidation could stand in the way of truth and justice when met with courage and preparation.